Good morning. I'm Warren, he's Charlie. There's one thing I should probably clear up first because I know it's puzzling you. In the movie, he always gets the girl. Now, that's hard to figure out, isn't it? But I finally understand what's happening. It's something called the Anna Nicole Smith rule. It's when choosing between two old rich guys, pick the older one. Now, in a few minutes, we're going to open this up to your questions. We have a number of zones, and we'll just proceed around zone by zone. But before we do that, there are a few people I would like to thank, and then there's a couple of short announcements I'd like to make. First of all, if we can get the spotlight up there on Andy Hayward. Andy does that cartoon for us every year. He travels around, he gets the voices in there. Andy, where are you? He's just terrific. He comes up with the ideas. Andy runs Deke Entertainment. Deke is the one I've told you about in the past that produced Liberty's Kids, which I think is probably the best way not only for youngsters to learn American history, but for people my age as well. I mean, it's a terrific series of young kids, a couple of young ones in the time of the American Revolution. And I watched several of those episodes, and I'd forgotten a lot of American history since I was in school. It's just it's a wonderful series. Appeared on PBS over time, and if you're looking to learn American history or have your children or grandchildren learn it, you couldn't do better. And in the months ahead, he's working on the what do we call it? It's the Secret Millionaires Club, but it's going to be a program that's designed to teach young people some of the very basic lessons about money. How to avoid getting into trouble with it, and how to use it effectively, and what your attitude should be toward it. So we're looking forward to getting that out early next year, and I'll guarantee you that it'll be a terrific program for teaching children and your grandchildren something about the subject of money. I also want to thank Bob Iger. Bob is up there. Bob runs Disney. He's doing a terrific job. And I thought we could originally entice the Desperate Housewives into appearing simply by the chance to appear with Charlie. But after we made that appeal, we then went to Bob Iger and said, see what you can do for us, Bob. So thank you, Bob. Also in that section, I'd like to have a special introduction for the man that first taught Charlie and me something about the value of franchises and the advisability of buying great businesses instead of cheap businesses. Prior to the purchase of See's Candy in 1972, I had tended to look primarily at financial measures in buying businesses and buying things that were cheap in relation to book value, and we always tried to get a lot of tangible assets in relation to our money. But we found out that the intangible assets, if properly nourished and if properly identified, you can make a whole lot more money with than buying a lot of tangible assets. 1972, early in 72, Charlie and I went to See's Candy, which had been in the hands of the See's family for many decades. And we bought it. And of course, Charlie and I didn't know a thing about making candy. We were pretty good at eating it. And we needed someone to run the place. We met a young fellow there. It was clear to both of us that he was the ideal person to run See's Candy, and in just a few minutes we made a deal with him that's lasted a lifetime. And if Chuck Huggins and his wife Donna would stand up, I'd love to have you give them a real well-deserved round of applause. As you notice, my daughter Susie produced that movie. She does every year. She works hard on it, and we don't pay her anything, although she does remind me occasionally when I'm out at Borsheim's that she worked very hard on the movie. And I'll see her there on Sunday. And Suze, if you would take a bow, please. And the impresario of this event, I just turn it over to her every year and forget about it. But she puts on this show. She brings all the exhibitors in. She arranges everything. She moves into the hotel across the street a few days ahead of time or a week ahead of time and makes sure everything hums. And Charlie and I just come down on the day of the meeting and take a bow. And that's Kelly Much More Bras. Kelly, are you here? Where's Kelly? There she is. Give her a big hand. We wouldn't be having this without her. Now, I'd like to introduce our directors. We're going to have the business meeting at 3:15. We do the Q&A first, and we get to that later on. But for those of you who won't be around, and a lot of people tend to leave it at lunchtime, I'd like to introduce the various directors. You've met Charlie and myself. And if you'll just stand individually, we can withhold the applause, if any, until the end. And that way, that embarrassing applause meter that we had on the Omaha Idol show will not cause anyone distress. Howard Buffett, Howie, Malcolm Chase, Bill Gates, David Gottesman, Charlotte Guyman, Don Keogh, Tom Murphy, Ron Olson, and Walter Scott Jr. It's a terrific group of directors. I literally know of no directors of any large publicly owned companies that have universally as significant a percentage of their net worth in the company purchased in the open market as that group. Do you, Charlie?
None.
None. Okay. Well, that may be all you hear from him, folks. So kind of savor it a little bit. You know. I also would particularly like to thank Jamie Lee Curtis, even though she came up with the wrong guy at the end. But Jamie cooperated on this. We're going to have, as a thank you, Jamie is very interested in the Park Century School. One of her sons goes to that school. It's for gifted but learning challenged students. They're having an auction tonight, but it will continue subsequently. Bill Gates and I have autographed a Monopoly set, and we will personally inscribe it to whoever the winner of that auction is. So if you want to go to eBay and check that out, we promise that we will not similarly autograph anything else. So I hope that Jamie Lee and the school have a big success on that. We have two announcements, one relatively unimportant but nevertheless pleasant, and that is that we released our earnings yesterday after the close, and I think we can put having any luck on that. Did we withdraw those earnings, Mark? Oh no, they stood up another 6 hours of audit or so, and as you can see, we don't pay any attention to realized gains or losses. We had some gains this year. We had some losses in the first quarter of last year. But that's meaningless in the short term. Over time, obviously, it makes a difference. But we do not pick anything to buy or sell in any given quarter or any given year in the way of securities based on the effect it will have on our income account for that period. It's totally immaterial. In fact, we'd rather sell things that we have a loss in just from a tax standpoint. If we have some high tax cost stocks and some low tax cost stock, we'll sell the high one and record the loss because we would get a better tax result that way for the short term. So we ignore that. But if you look at the operating earnings, you'll see that in those main divisions that I take in the annual report, I show our four major businesses and then investment income as a side. Things worked out pretty well in the first quarter for all of them. I would caution you that in our insurance underwriting, our worst quarter would normally be expected to be our third quarter. You're not going to have hurricanes in this hemisphere in the first quarter. The real exposure, the worst exposure is in the third quarter, and then there's a lesser exposure in the fourth quarter. We write a lot of catastrophe insurance business. Earthquakes, as far as we know, don't have any particular seasonal aspect to them, but hurricanes definitely do. Now, the interesting thing is that under standard accounting, if we write a hurricane policy for the calendar year 2006 and we receive $1 million of premium, we would earn $250,000 in the first quarter and $250,000 in the second quarter and so on. We would earn it pro rata throughout the year. And that, in our view, actually is not proper accounting, but it's required accounting. The real exposure to loss is primarily in the third quarter. So you can't take our insurance underwriting results in any way for a rather benign quarter like the first quarter and extrapolate them for the year. But nevertheless, it was a very good year, a very good quarter. GEICO had excellent growth. I believe that I'm almost certain that our growth in the first quarter was better than any of our main competitors, and actually probably by some margin. The underwriting was very good. Our reinsurance underwriting was very good. Gen Re had a good quarter. Our smaller companies had a good quarter. So things generally have been working very well in all four sectors, and that's nice, but that's not terribly important. I mean, 5 years from now, nobody will remember whether the first quarter or the second quarter was that good at Berkshire Hathaway. But what did happen, and which we announced last night, which was very important, the acquisition of a large, extremely well-managed, profitable, really extraordinary company called ISCAR. And up until October of last year, I knew nothing of ISCAR. I did not know about their extraordinary management, but I got a letter, and I got a letter from Eitan Wertheimer, and maybe a page and a half, page and a quarter, and he told me something about this business. And sometimes character and talent sort of just jump off the page at me, and this was one of those letters. It came from Israel, and I expressed an interest after reading this letter in getting together with Eitan. And not long thereafter, I met not only Eitan, but his CEO and president, a remarkable man named Jacob Harpaz, Danny Goldman, his CFO, and we met in Omaha. They subsequently met Charlie, and this all came to fruition. Signed a contract. Now we have, before I go on to this, maybe Charlie would like to say a word or two about ISCAR, because he's, hard as it is for you to believe, he is not only, he's as enthusiastic about this as I am. Now, have you ever seen that before, I ask you? Charlie likes this one extraordinarily well. Charlie?
Well, this is a company that, from very modest beginnings, rose to be the best company in its field in the world. It's not yet the biggest, but that leaves them something to do. The average quality of the people in this company is not only extraordinary, it's off the chart. And the beauty of this, as you look at the two of us, is they're all young. No, this is a real quality enterprise, and these people know how to do some things that we don't know how to do, a lot. So, of course, we're enthusiastic about the company. You know, I'm always enthusiastic when I get to deal with some of the best people in the world.
I would like, if we get the spotlight down there, right out here in front, I would like individually 3 managers to stand up, and then Eitan is going to talk to us a bit, and then I think we've got it arranged so we can have a short movie that will tell you something about ISCAR. But first of all, if Eitan Wertheimer would stand up and we could get the spotlight on him. Over there, okay. Eitan, let me introduce the other two, and then can we have you speak to the group. Jacob Harpaz is the president and CEO. Take a good look at these people, because they're going to do very, very well for you. And Danny Goldman, would you stand up? Thank you. And if you'll give the microphone to Eitan, I think Eitan would like to talk to the group just a bit.
Good morning, everybody. It's Omaha. It's spring. The fields are green. The days get longer. And we bring a big family into a new home. I'm standing here before you representing 5,869 people. Not only the people, but their families, the past, and their future. It took us 3 years to look what to do next. We were successful. We still have a lot of mistakes ahead of us to do. Until we found one day somebody came to us and asked, have you heard about Berkshire Hathaway and Mr. Buffett? We said, yes, we heard, but we never thought about it. And when we started studying about the company, we understood that this is the right combination for us, a family company with a strong culture, and a culture we love to keep, a young group of people that we love to work, maybe not for very long, but not less than 20, 25 years from today. And we decided, let's try it. And we had a very interesting lesson from Warren. We had a very interesting lesson from Charlie. And we survived both of them. I'm very happy that I represent here not only the people that make the product and go to the customers. I also, in a way, represent a big family of customers that manufacture things. They'll make cars go faster and safer. They'll make airplanes fly. They will make the mold to make the bottles for the Coca-Cola. They'll make a washing machine. They'll make the tools to make a carpet. They'll make many things. And many times the people that manufacture are a little bit in the shade. And I'm very proud to stand as a manufacturing guy and say, I'm standing for all of them, all our customers, which I must thank them every morning, not only for buying, but also for trying new ideas that we bring and working very hard to stay competitive. Whoever will stay competitive will be there long term. And this is also our goal. Here is Mr. Harpaz, Jacob. In reality, my job is not to disturb. And he, in a very gentle way, fired me 10 years ago. He performed and did better things than I could do. And it didn't make sense that I'll disturb him, so I went on to do other things. We've been in the company only 34 years, and the real job is done by Jacob and many, many other people. I'm sure that you have seen the film in 80 days around the world, and we prepared for you in 61 companies around the world. And I hope you enjoy it. We definitely have to fulfill a lot of expectations. We definitely have to work very hard to make everybody very proud that we join the family, also our people, and for sure everybody in this room. So let's hope we all be successful, and let's look into the future. And I'm looking forward to come every spring to Omaha when the fields are green and the days get longer. Thank you.
IMC presents Better Solutions for a Better World. In 1889, the appearance of the first automobiles brought with it the need for sophisticated solutions in metal processing. Such were the beginnings of a new company launched by engineers in the U.S., Ingersoll. In the decades to follow, another plant was set up in Germany. Since its creation, Ingersoll has established strong ties with industry, which has placed it firmly in a leadership position. For over a century, time after time, Ingersoll has proved that the best solutions begin with the best engineers. In 1999, Ingersoll joined the IMC Group and discovered that the sky is not the limit, but only the starting point. Meantime, at the turn of the 20th century, another metal processing plant was established on the other side of the world, in South Korea, Tegotech. In joining the IMC Group in 1997, Tegotech reinforced its position as the main supplier of cutting tools for industry in the Far East. Today, Tegotech has achieved unparalleled success, penetrating new markets, streamlining production process, and showing that precise global thinking can cancel distances. In the middle of the 20th century, in the north of Israel, Steph Wertheimer had predicted, from his little shack in Nahariya, the global need for more advanced metal cutting tools. The new world demands better solutions, said Wertheimer, and established Iskar. In a relatively short time, Iskar has become the second largest cutting tool manufacturer in the world, a leader in the area of metal removal. Iskar has revolutionized every aspect of machining. Its mission, to apply innovation, quality, and automation on the highest technological level. Among Iskar's groundbreaking achievements are the revolution in cutoff applications, development of self-grip in the 70s, the pioneering triumphs in milling, the heli mill in the 80s, the cam drill, the revolution in drilling in the 90s, and tangential positive milling, the innovative tang mill. These innovations and more have reinforced Iskar's position as the world's leader in development of cutting tools. The combination of Ingersoll, Tegotech, and Iskar has given rise to the IMC Group, taking the best of all worlds and creating the world's best tools. Today's rapidly advancing world demands that we constantly elevate standards, apply ourselves more and more to provide ever smarter and precise solutions, pushes us to advance, to improve ourselves, to lead.
They have to be a full line supplier. To be a global company means to be local in many countries, in many places around the world.
Other IMC Group companies. E-Teddy, Italy. Designers and manufacturers of PCD diamond tools for high-precision aluminum machining in the automotive and aerospace industry. UOP, Italy. Producers of high-quality solid carbide and high-speed steel standard tools and special tailor-made designs for applications in the aerospace and die and mold industries. Utiltech, France. Expert creative solutions and extra-long gun drills for deep drilling and applications that require unique geometries. Unitac, Japan. Deep drilling, BTA-style tools with brazed and indexable heads. And Vertec, Italy. Design and manufacture of unique counter-boring tools for deep and complicated boring applications.
If you look outside and you see some cars over there, be aware that in each car, at least one part is manufactured by one of the IMC companies, for sure.
Automotive.
Before you have the product line, the geography spread, the people that understand the language, you cannot start thinking, may I try or may I not try to become automotive supplier.
We at IMC have made the automotive industry the foremost objective for all the factories of the group. All the Ingersoll vessels connect to contribute massively to the work of the automotive industry in North America. At the same time, on the other side of the globe, Tegotech Cutting Tools joins the momentum of the rapidly developing Japanese and Korean automotive industries. The alliance between ISCAR's developments and the IMC Group has led to comprehensive solutions which contribute to the efficiency of global automotive production and pave the way for production cost savings.
We are not only selling tools, we are selling technology. We are selling the customer a better way to make profit. And we believe by giving a solution, it can increase his productivity and the bottom line from the productivity, making more profit for his company.
Heavy industry. The power of IMC comes clearly to the fore in heavy industry. The unique combination of the three main manufacturing plants creates new opportunities. The geographic location of Ingersoll and Tegotech has led the companies to develop specific heavy industry specialization. The innovative geometries developed by ISCAR, together with the design and production of tools made to conform to the special requirements of this industry, places IMC at the forefront of this important industry. Aerospace. The blend of precision and inventiveness ought to go far. If you want to reach far and high, you must be on top of the game in technology, in understanding materials, in daring. The aerospace industry demands machining solutions for exotic and difficult to process materials, proficiency in lightweight materials such as aluminum. Grouping of the three plants and the profound understanding of cutting materials and complex cutting geometries, along with the expertise in building large-sized tools, make IMC the strategic partner for the aerospace industry. General engineering. All this vast engineering experience accumulated in every field, in every industry, and in every corner of the world has paved the way for the development of new groundbreaking tools, which streamline production processes, shorten machining time, and reduce costs for every customer in the world of general engineering.
after releasing the product into the market, we put another team, our own team, and tell them now compete against the release of the product.
In exhibitions, we are recognized as a very, very innovative company. Many times the sentences, let's go there because they must have something new. They always have something new. That's a big compliment, and the innovation will make the difference.
I believe that in a way, industry is an art in itself. It's art. It's creation. You create something.
You can see it immediately upon entering an IMC branch or factory. The House of IMC is first and foremost a home for employees and customers as one. Years of experience have taught us that this is a vital element for success.
Many companies have buildings and machines and a lot of real estate, but it's only people that have a chance to make any difference.
I believe with the ambition of the people, with the hard working of the people, we are going to reach the position of being number one.
The world demands better solutions. That is why we're here. IMC.
This is an important acquisition, as we paid $4 billion for 80% of the company. The family remains in partnership with us. They retain 20%. It's the first business we've purchased that is based outside the United States. We have others that have operations there. I think you'll look back on this in 5 or 10 years as being a very significant event in Berkshire's history. And it's interesting in this world in which many businesses get auctioned off, figures get dressed up before they sell them and leveraged up and so on. We continue to hear from people periodically who consider their businesses too important to auction. And we've never really bought one at auction, have we, Charlie? Did I remember?
I can't remember one either.
Yeah. So there's a benefit in that, because in effect, the people that pass through that filter of caring enough about their business that they don't simply put it up like a piece of meat in an auction are also the people, in our view, that make the best managers and make the best partners over time. There is something going on in their brain that says this business is so important, and the people that are here are so important, and the customers we take care of are so important, that we actually care about the home in which these businesses reside. And I think that filter works very much to our benefit. We've bought a number of businesses in the last 15 or 18 months where people have felt that way. And I think the crowning one here is ISCAR. So I welcome our new friends from Israel. I'm going to go over there and visit in September to see if there are any more girls out there like you, and see if we can drum up a little more business. And with that, let's go on to the question period, and we will do this until noon, at which time we'll break for 45 minutes or so and come back, and then we'll continue until about 3 o'clock. Then we'll break for about 15 minutes, have the formal business meeting from 3:15 to 3:16, and then at 4 o'clock, Charlie and I are meeting with all of the people that came from outside of North America. This year we had about 550 requests for tickets from countries outside of North America, as opposed to about 380 last year. So we're looking forward to meeting all of you that have come a long way to attend this meeting. Now we've got a dozen zones in here, and we'll start off with zone number 1.
Yeah, my name is Edward Janik from Denver, Colorado. First, I want to thank Charlie and Peter Kaufman for their wonderful book. I think Benjamin Franklin would be very proud. My question is, last year when asked about Social Security, you said that a country as rich as the U.S. should take care of their old people. This year I read Pete Peterson's book, Running on Empty, and I was wondering, from the standpoint that is the greatest benefit to society, where should you draw the line on entitlement spending? And I was wondering if you gentlemen disagree on the subject at all.
Well, you always have the question in every society, whether it's formalized or not, you have the question of how you take care of the old and the young. You have people in their productive years turning out goods and services, and you have people that are too young to participate in the turning out of those goods and services, but that nevertheless need them, and you have people that are old in the same position. And starting in 1935, I believe, we statutorily formalized that idea. We'd always felt that way about the young, that the school should be there for them and when they couldn't pay for them themselves, and that the society owed a duty to both classes. But in 1935, we took up the idea that the government would provide this base limit. Now, I think there's some merit to the argument that the 65 became outmoded as longevity improved, and that is now being changed to some degree, and I think there's probably some more change needed. But this country has an output of almost $40,000 of GDP per person, and some people, like Charlie and myself, are very lucky to be wired in a way that in a market system we get enormously wealthy, and other people are not so wired, and they come out and they in a market system do not necessarily do so well, and they're fairly lucky if they provide for themselves during their working years, and they do not have the ability to earn at a rate that takes care of them in later years. And society has taken that on. Our country can easily handle the Social Security question. I mean, it's kind of astounding to me that a government that is quite happy to run a $300 or $400 billion deficit now worries a lot about the fact they're going to have a $100 billion deficit or something in Social Security 30 years from now. I mean, there's a little bit of irony in that. It is true that if we maintain the present age brackets, that eventually you have one person in the older years for every two that are producing in the younger years. But we produce more every year as we go along, and there will always be a struggle in a representative society, a democratic society, between how you divide up that pie. But we have a huge pie, we have a growing pie, and we can very easily take care of people in a manner at least as well as we take care of them now in the future from that growing pie, without the people in their productive years not also having a gain in their standard of living. Charlie?
Yeah, I think the world of Pete Peterson, but I don't come to the same conclusion. Of course, if we didn't tinker with Social Security, it would eventually run low on funds. But if the country is going to grow at 2 or 3% per annum for decades ahead, it's child's play to take a little larger share of the pie and divert it to the people who are older. It would be crazy, I think, to think you would always freeze the share of money going to the old at exactly the same sum, no matter how rich you got. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, to pay a little more in the future to support what I regard as one of the most successful programs in the history of our country. Social Security has a low overhead and does a world of good. It's a very reasonable promise to make, and I wish my own party would wise up a little on how little an issue it is.
This is what happens when you ask a couple of guys our age how you feel about treating older people. this is what happens when you ask a couple of guys our age how you feel about treating older people. Incidentally, currently, everybody likes to talk about the unified budget. You didn't hear talk about the unified budget 30 years ago on the national level, but the unified budget means that the Social Security surplus now gets counted toward reducing the overall budget. So they're very happy at present to take the Social Security surplus and trumpet the number that is after that. But then when they start talking about a Social Security deficit out 20 or 30 years, they tend to they want to separate that off and get very panicky about it. So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy in the argument. Let's go to number 2.
Good morning. My name is Phil Rafton, shareholder from Orinda, California. My question for you: how would you design a compensation system in a very cyclical industry that can swing from boom to bust? You want to tie compensation to results in some way, but this can lead to huge swings in pay. And for example, today in booming industries like energy and mining, profits are large as a result of the boom in the industry and not necessarily the results of management skill. Conversely, when the industry is down, profits are low due to no fault of management. So again, my question: how do you design a compensation package to best reward management performance?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, because if you're running a copper company now with copper at $3.50 a pound, you can coin money even if you happen to be the village idiot. Similarly, when copper was at 80 or 90 cents a pound, which has been most of our adult lifetime in that general, there were fairly sparse times in mining much of that at the time. And we design compensation systems at Berkshire. We have dozens and dozens of companies. Some of them are capital intensive, some of them are cyclical, some of them don't require much capital, some of them are terrific businesses if no one runs them. Some of them are very difficult businesses, even if the best of management comes. And we have a wide variety of compensation systems. You're wise when you say, how do you design one for that kind of a situation? Because so often people come in with sort of standardized systems or whatever the highest system they see is, and then apply it to their own benefit. Most people, if left to select their own compensation systems, will come up with the appropriate, from their standpoint, comparable arrangement. If we owned a copper mining company in its entirety, we would measure it probably more by costs of production than we would by whether copper was selling for $2 a pound or $1 a pound. I mean, the management has control, depends on the kind of ore bodies and everything, but they certainly have control over operating conditions. They do not have control over market prices. And we would have something, I think, that would not fluctuate a lot in a business like that. The bonus available, but it would probably tie to what we thought was under the control of the individual that was managing the business. That's what we try to measure. We try to understand the industry in which they operate, and we try to understand the things that the manager can have an impact on and how well they're doing in that. We measure at GEICO, for example, we measure by 2 unit measures. One is growth, unit growth, and one is the profitability of seasoned business. New business costs money. We want new business, so we don't charge that against the manager or the 20,000 other employees who share in it. We do not want to pay for anything that is not under their control. We do not want to pay for the wrong things. And I would say in a cyclical business that if oil is $70 a barrel, I don't think any particular management deserves credit for it. In fact, they all sort of deny that they've got anything to do with it when they got called before Congress. But I would not give them credit for the fact that oil is $70 a barrel or $40 a barrel. I would give them credit for low finding costs for over time. I mean, what you really want to do if you have a producing oil company is you want a management that over a 5 or 10 year period discovers and develops oil at lower than average unit costs. And there's been a huge difference in performance in that among even the major companies. And I would pay the people that did that well. I would pay them very well because they're creating wealth for me. And I would not pay the guy a lot of money that simply is cashing in on $70 oil and that really has got a terrible record in finding it at reasonable prices. Charlie?
Yeah, it's easy to have a fair compensation system like we have at Berkshire. And a lot of other publicly traded corporations also have fair compensation systems. But about half of them have grossly unfair systems in which the top people get paid too much. We know how to fix Berkshire, but our ability to influence the half of American industry where the compensation systems are unfair has so far been about zero.
Yeah, one thing you may find interesting, we have, I don't know, 68 operating companies. We probably have, I probably have responsibility for the compensation system of perhaps 40 managers or thereabouts, because some of them have businesses grouped under them. I can't think of anyone we have lost over a 40-year period because of differences in views on compensation. We've never had a compensation consultant come into Berkshire. They may have had them at the subsidiaries, but they're smart enough not to tell me. It's never happened. I mean, we do not have lots of meetings. We don't spend a lot of time on it. It is not rocket science. It's made more complicated than it needs to be, more confusing than it needs to be, because having a system that is complicated and confusing serves the needs of some who want to get paid a whole lot more than they're worth. And the system won't change because it's working to the advantage of the people that have their hand on the switch, the people that pick the human relations consultants and pick the people who are on the comp committee. I was put on one comp committee, and Charlie can tell you what happened. He was there.
Yeah, we were the biggest shareholder at Solomon. Two of us were on the board, and Warren was on the comp committee. And in that frenzy of envy which characterizes compensation and investment banking, Warren remonstrated softly, I thought, toward a slightly more rational result, and he was outvoted.
Charlie used the term envy rather than greed, which is interesting because that's been our experience, is that envy is probably a bigger motivation in terms of people wanting to be in that top quartile or whatever it may be than greed. It's a very interesting phenomenon that you can hand somebody a $2 million bonus and they're fine until they find out that the person next to them got $2.1 million, and then they're sick for the next year. Charlie has pointed out, of the 7 deadly sins, that envy is kind of the silliest, because you don't feel better. I mean, if you get envious of somebody, you feel worse the whole time. Now, gluttony, I've had some of my best times while being gluttonous. I mean, there's a real upside to gluttony. I don't. We won't get into lust, but I've heard that there are upsides to that occasionally. But envy, all you do is sit around and make yourself sick and can't get to sleep. But it's part of the human psyche, and you see it big time, and you get this irony. The SEC wants even more transparency on pay, which I think, basically is a good idea, except for the fact that it becomes a shopping list for every other CEO when they see that somebody is getting their haircuts paid for by the company, and they decide that they too need their haircuts paid for by the company, and they suddenly become big tippers. Let's move on to number 3.
Greetings to all of you from the Midwest of Europe. I'm Norman Rentrop from Bonn, Germany. Thank you very much for writing your shareholder letter in such a way that we feel treated as partners. Warren, in the shareholder letter, you ended with your thoughts on managing Berkshire Hathaway in the future. May I ask you, how do you train your successors? What do you tell them? How do you summarize to them what is important to you? And how, if you were able to do so, how would you measure whether or not they have lived up to your expectations?
Well, that's a good question, and I think actually in reading that letter, that's part of the reason it's written is to convey not only to our partners, our shareholders, but also to our managers and anybody else in the public, what Berkshire is all about. This meeting, in terms of what we do, is intended to give a personality and a character to Berkshire. And we don't say it's better than anybody else's necessarily, but we do think it's us. And we think we want managers to join us who believe in the sort of operation we have, a partnership with shareholders, a lifetime commitment to the businesses. We want those people to join us. We want what they see after they join us to underscore the values we have. So everything we do, we hope is consistent with what most people would call a culture at Berkshire. So that the written word, what they see, what they hear, what they observe. And that is training in itself. It's the same sort of training you get as a child. I mean, when you are in the home, you're learning something every day by the behavior of these terribly important people, these big people that are around you. And a home has a culture, a business has a culture, to some extent a country can have a culture. And we try to do everything that's consistent with that. We try to do nothing that is inconsistent with that. And believe me, if you're a bright business Berkshire manager, and they are bright, they buy into it to start with. They see that it works, and it doesn't require formal lessons or mentoring or anything of the sort. I mean, if you talk to our Berkshire managers, you would find that they think consistently with how, in effect, Charlie and I think. There are plenty of people that don't, and they don't join us. I mean, we hear all the time from people. I've got one coming in a little while, actually, that nothing's going to come of it because this guy has his brain processes things different than mine does, and I'm kind of interested in learning about his business, so we'll get together. But it wouldn't fit. It would just not. It would be a mismatch. And the nice thing about it is our culture is so well defined that there aren't many mistakes in terms of people entering it or behaving in a way inconsistent with it. So I don't think there's any formal training necessary. I mentioned in the annual report the fact that if I die tonight, there are 3 obvious candidates to take my place. Now the board knows which one of them they would agree on tonight. Might be different 3 years from now. But any of those 3 would not miss a beat in terms of stepping in to the culture that I hope we have here, because it's theirs too. Charlie?
Well, if Warren has kept the faith until he's 75 years old in maintaining a certain kind of culture and a certain way of thinking, do you really think he's going to blow the job of passing the faith on? What could be more important in terms of his duties in life?
Yeah.
You all have something. You all have something more important to do than worry about the fact that the candle is going to go out at Berkshire just because some people die. This is a a place where the faith is going to go on for a long time. And of course, at headquarters, we aren't training executives. We find them. And they're not hard to find. You know, if a mountain stands up like Everest, you don't have to be a genius to recognize that it's a high mountain.
Okay, number 4.
Hello, my name is Ewan Gunn, and I'm from Whitehaven in England. Actually, the last time I was this nervous asking a question, I'd just presented my wife with an engagement ring from Borsheims. So,
well, I hope you get nervous again.
My question for you is, with the enthusiasm at the moment for emerging markets, many closed-end funds which contain emerging market stocks are trading at significant premiums to their net asset values, even when open-ended funds can be used to acquire similar portfolios of stocks for the net asset values. This doesn't seem very rational to me. Why do these premiums persist, and do you agree that it's irrational?
Yeah, I would say it would tend to be. I don't know anything about the specifics that you're referring to on emerging market funds. I haven't looked at the size of the premiums, but history would certainly show that most closed-end funds, just about all closed-end funds, eventually go to discounts. I actually worked, well, I'll skip that analogy, but the overwhelmingly closed-end funds have gone to discounts. You know, initially, if they're sold with a 6% commission, of course, the initial people are getting 94 cents of net asset value by paying the dollar. But if I had an interest in buying into emerging markets through other people's management, and I could buy an open-end fund at X or at asset value, and I had to pay 120% of X for some closed-end fund, you'd have to convince me very strongly that the management of the closed-end fund was better. So I think you're right. I don't know the size. The premium's a few percent. It doesn't really make much difference. But occasionally, Charlie and I have witnessed in the past closed-end funds that have sold even at 30 or 40% premiums over asset value. Overseas Securities was a tiny fund that used to do that for years and baffled everybody. But eventually they will come back down to earth. Charlie?
I've got nothing to add.
He's hitting his stride now. Number 5.
Warren and Charlie, I want to thank you for putting a once obscure Midwestern city on the map last year with your acquisition of Pete Legal's company, Forest River. I'm Frank Martin from Elkhart, Indiana, the RV capital of the world.
We're glad to have you here, Frank. Frank has just brought out a book, incidentally, that's a history of some of his annual letters. It's a good book, and I recommend you get it.
Thank you, Warren. I also want to thank you for your influence over Robin Williams and other Hollywood stars. Those of you who have seen the movie RV realize that Warren will go to no ends to promote the products of the companies he acquires.
A few people have already noticed that, actually, Frank.
On a more serious note, there's a small but growing trend in American business governance to move from plurality voting for directors to majority voting, along the standard in Great Britain. What do you see as the upside and downside of majority voting as it relates to raising the standard of ethics in the corporate boardroom?
Charlie, you want to take a swing at that?
I don't think it'll have any effect at all on ethics in the corporate boardroom. There get to be fashions in the government's subject. I think that the troubles in American corporations are not going to be fixed by something like that. all these reforms have to be considered in the light of the kind of people that are likely to be activist in using new powers. And that crowd is a mixed crowd, to put it gently.
The question in the boardroom is to what extent, and you have to understand it's partly a business situation, it's partly a social situation. The question is to what extent do the people that are participating there think like owners, and whether they know enough about business so that even if they're trying to think like owners, that their decisions will be any good. And Charlie and I have been on boards of companies with dual voting. Berkshire has that, although it's so minor that it doesn't really make any difference. But we've been on other boards, and I have never really seen any difference in behavior based on the nature of the votes that got them into the boardroom. But there's an enormous difference. I think you'd be blown away if you watched boardrooms over the years. There's just an enormous difference in terms of really the business savvy of the people in the room, the degree to which they are thinking like owners as they go along. I've seen no, I don't know that dual voting or the lack of dual voting really is going to have very much to do with that. The key, I've mentioned it in the past, there's all these fashions, as Charlie says, in corporate governance, but the job of the board is to get the right CEO, to prevent that CEO from overreaching, because sometimes you have some people that are very able, but they still want to take it all for themselves. But if they take nothing and they're the wrong CEO, there's still a disaster. So low pay itself is not the criteria. But you want the right CEO, you do not want them overreaching, and then I think the board needs to exercise independent judgment on important acquisitions, because I think CEOs, even smart CEOs, are motivated frequently in acquisitions by other than rational reasons. And in those three areas, American directors I don't think they've given a tremendous account of themselves in recent years, whether at dual system places or otherwise. The only cure to better corporate governance, in my view, is that if the very large shareholders start really zeroing in on whether those questions I just mentioned are being addressed properly. If they go on all these peripheral issues, they have a lot of fun and they get in the papers, they have little checklists and they can issue grades and all that. It isn't going to do anything in terms of making American business working better. But if the 8 or 10 largest shareholder groups, if the really large institutional investors say, this compensation plan doesn't make any sense and we're not voting for the directors, and here's why we're not voting for the directors, you'd get change. But so far they've been unwilling to do that. It takes the big shareholders. It's not going to be done by any coalition of small shareholders or people sticking things on ballots. But the big shareholders of this country, basically some of them have farmed out their voting even. I was amazed to find that out, that a number of very large institutional investors have actually just turned their voting process over to somebody else. They don't want to think like owners, and we all bear the penalty for that. Number 6.
Hello, my name is Andy Pollan from Adrian, Michigan. Thank you once again for having me to Omaha. My question is for Warren, but Charlie, please add your thoughts as well. Warren, I've heard you say many times that you don't understand technology and that you rely on Bill for that, and that's fine. And I see from this year's movie that you're learning, so that's good.
Slowly.
I'm also curious to hear what you've learned so far about the other information technology companies such as
Charlie and I have circles of competence that extend to evaluating a number of types of businesses, and there are a whole lot of businesses that we won't be able to evaluate. Some of them I think very few people can evaluate. I mean, you get outside of, you just get into businesses where the future is so likely to be different than the present. that maybe there's a few people who have great insights on it, but we sure don't. We are best at the businesses where we can come to a judgment that they're going to look a good bit like they do now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. They'll be bigger, they'll be doing different things, but the fundamentals will be the same. This car will be a bigger company 5 years from now, maybe a much bigger company, and we may get a chance to do interesting acquisitions. But what you saw there, the fundamentals won't change. The way the people think won't change. I can name a number of businesses that are bound to change dramatically. I mean, when you think of how much the telecom business, for example, has changed over the last 15 or 20 years, it's startling. Even with hindsight, it's a little hard to figure out, who was going to make all the money and so on. There's just games that are too tough. Charlie says, we've got 3 boxes at the company: in, out, and too hard. And a lot of things end up in the too hard pile, and it doesn't bother us. We don't have to be able to do everything well. If you go to the Olympics, if you can run the 100-meter well, you don't have to throw the shot put. Some other guy can throw the shot put, and you'll still get a gold ribbon, if you run the 100-meter fast enough. So we try to stay within the circle of competence. Tom Watson Sr., I think it was Sr. Yeah, Tom Watson Sr. many years ago said, "I'm no genius, but I'm smart in spots, and I stay around those spots." Well, that was pretty damn smart, and we have found a lot of our managers who don't think, they can solve every problem in the world, but they run their businesses extraordinarily well. You do not want to, Frank Martin mentioned Forest River, you do not want to go and compete with Pete Legal in his business. He's going to kill you, and he's very, very, very good. But he doesn't come around and try and tell us how to run the insurance business, because that's not his game. We look for people that are very good at things they understand, and we don't get any inferiority complex at all about the fact that, you mentioned Intel, I believe. I was virtually there at the birth of Intel because I was on the board of Grinnell, and Bob Noyce was the chairman of the board of Grinnell. And we bought $300,000 worth of their original debentures. And, I knew Bob. I thought he was a very, very smart guy. But I wouldn't have had the faintest idea how to evaluate the future of Intel then. And I really don't have it now, And I think they probably had a few surprises themselves in the last few years with AMD and what's been happening in their business. But what that's going to look like in 5 years, I don't have any idea. And I'm not so sure if you were in the industry, you'd know exactly what it was going to look like in 5 years. Some businesses just are very, very hard to predict. Charlie?
Yeah, one of the foreign correspondents last year, after looking at us carefully, said in effect, "You guys don't seem smart enough to do so much better than other people as you're doing."
Was he looking at me or you, Charlie?
Both. Have you got an explanation? And we said, we know the edge of our competency better than most people do. It's a very useful thing to know the edge of your competency. And I always say, it's not a competency if you don't know the edge of it.
I'll have to think about that a little bit. Bill will explain it to me later. Area 7, please.
I am John Bailey from Boston, Massachusetts. I wanted to ask Warren and Charlie if you could consider 3 hypothetical securities for a long-term investment. The first would be like a share in median family income for the United States. The background there that in real terms, median family income has been stagnant for approximately 30 years. The second security would be a share in all corporate income in the United States. The background there that corporate income has been taking an ever larger slice of GDP for several years. And finally, a bit more abstract, a share in all capital assets in the United States, and I would like to include all intangible capital assets if possible. So would any of these be of interest for a long-term holding, perhaps 20 years or so? And if not, why not?
Well, I think I'd rather buy ISCAR. The corporate profits, as you point out, have been close to their highs except for a very few years, post-World War II, and as a percentage of GDP. It's hard to imagine it being much larger. It's interesting. While corporate profits is reported, you take the S&P, it's percentage of book, percentage of sales, go down the line, they're all on the high end. Corporate income taxes really are not that high relative to the total revenues of the country. So you can see that there's been a little disconnect there in some manner. But median family income is something that Charlie and I have never even considered. We're not shooting for that. It is certainly true that in the last 5 to 10 years that the disparity in income has widened significantly, and that the tax breaks for the wealthy have been extraordinary. I've pointed out in the past that most of the members of the Forbes 400, myself included, pay a lower percentage of their income to the U.S. government, counting Social Security taxes, than does the receptionist that works in their office. That was not true 30 years ago, and I don't think it's something that should be true in a rich society, but it has happened. And I just computed my 2005 return. In 2004, and I have no tax shelters. I don't have a tax advisor. I just do things, and at the end of the year I add it all up. In 2004, my rate was the lowest of the 15 or 16 people in the office, and in 2005 my rate was even lower. And that's courtesy of the US government. That's not courtesy of a lot of tax write-offs or anything of the sort. And I think it's crazy, and I don't think the American people understand it very well. And I think that if they did understand it, they should and would be quite unhappy about it. So I think that the lower incomes, median people making medium amounts of income have not shared in the prosperity of the last decade or so in a way that's all proportional to the way the wealthy have participated in it. The last point you mentioned, a little too esoteric for me, so I'll pass it over to Charlie.
Well, yeah, but I think the main figure that matters to all of us, including the people at the median, is how does GDP per capita grow, and those figures have been very good. And so I wouldn't get too wild on the subject of the median income. It isn't like we're all permanently in some status with nobody moving from status A to status B. There's a huge flux both up and down. And what's really important is that the pie keep growing at a decent clip. All that said, I think that Warren's right that some of those tax changes were a little crazy. I mean, they caused more envy than we needed. But I don't think it's all that important.
Yeah, we might think it was more important if we were working at the median income, Charlie. I think. Let's go to number 8.
Good morning. I'm Diane Ryan from Kansas City. My question is, what is your opinion on the economics of ethanol and just as a fuel additive? And as a potential investor, should I be looking at that industry?
Well, I don't know enough to answer the latter part. I know Charlie and I would not know enough to evaluate ethanol projects. We've been approached on them, and of course they're quite popular now. But in terms of figuring out what an ethanol plant is going to be earning on capital 5 or 10 years from now, it's far easier for us to figure out whether people are going to be drinking Coca-Cola or even eating See's candy, which I highly recommend. So it will depend on government policy. It will depend on a lot of variables that we're not particularly good at predicting. It's easy to raise money for it now. I mean, it's a popular item. It's hot, and our general experience is that we don't look at things very much that are hot at any given time. I know nothing about the biochemistry or anything of the sort. I have a son who was head of the ethanol board in Nebraska, and if I notice that he suddenly starts getting richer than I am, I will suspect that I should start looking at ethanol very hard. But so far I haven't seen tangible evidence of that. And, there's no question ethanol usage is going to grow. I mean, that we will see. Generally speaking, agricultural processing business have not earned high returns on capital. I mean, if you look at Cargill, you look at ADM, you look at the big processors, that has not been a great business, and ethanol could prove an exception, but I'm not sure how you gain a significant competitive advantage over time, with any given ethanol plant. And if you get too many of them around, it will not be a good thing when you're turning out a commodity. Charlie?
Well, my attitude is even more hostile than Warren's. I have just enough glimmers of thermodynamics left in me to suspect that that it takes more fossil fuel energy to create ethanol than you can get out of the ethanol you've created. If so, that's a very stupid way to try and solve an energy problem.
Well, considering my family situation, I would say I have friends who like ethanol and I have friends who don't like ethanol. And I want my position to be perfectly clear. I'm for my friends. Let's go to number 9.
Hello, my name is Johann Freudenberg from Hanover, Germany. Do you think we are in a commodity bubble? Thank you.
Well, certainly not in agricultural commodities. They haven't done anything if you're talking about wheat or corn or soybeans or something. But if you get into the metals, oil, there's been a terrific move. The most extreme probably has been copper, and I would say that oil, if you go back a few years to when it was at $10 a barrel, it's been more extreme than copper. But you are undoubtedly, it's like most trends. At the beginning, it's driven by fundamentals, and at some point, speculation takes over. The very fact that the fundamentals cause something that people have looked at for years without getting excited about, fundamentals change the picture in some way. Copper does get a little short, or people get a little worried about currency and maybe gold goes up or whatever it may be. But it's that old story of what the wise man does in the beginning, the fool does in the end. And with any asset class that has a big move that's based initially on fundamentals is going to attract speculative participation at some point, and that speculative participation can become dominant as time goes by, and famous case always being tulip bulbs. I mean, tulips may have been more attractive than dandelions or something, so people paid a little more money for them. But once a price history develops that causes people to start looking at an asset that they never looked at before and to get envious of the fact that they're because he saw this early and so on. That takes over. And my guess is that we're seeing some of that in the commodity area. And of course, I think we've seen some of it in the housing area too. How far it goes, you never know. I mean, some things go on to just unbelievable heights. And then, silver went back in there. That was manipulation to some extent, but it got up to $50 an ounce very briefly back in the early 80s. But the eyes of the world that never looked at silver when it was $1.60 or something, or $1.30 back in the 60s, everybody in the world was looking at it, and some were shorting and some were buying, but it becomes a speculative football. And my guess is that an awful lot of the activity in something like copper now is speculative on both sides of the market. If it goes to $5 a pound, who knows? But you are looking at a market that is responding more to speculative forces now than to fundamental forces, in my view. Charlie?
Well, I think we've demonstrated how little we know about commodity prices by our very skillful operations in silver.
I think you can change that from R to it's mine. Actually, I bought it very early. I sold it very early. Other than that, everything I did was perfect. I mean, we managed to minimize things there with great efficiency. Or I managed to. Charlie didn't have anything to do with that. I was the silver king there for a while. We did make a few dollars on it, but we're not good at the game of, when it gets into the speculative area, figuring out how far a speculative boom will go. If the fundamentals are attractive, we think we're getting a lot for our money, buying equities or whatever it may be. We'll make some money. We may not make as much money, remotely as much money as somebody who is plays out the last 30 days or 30 weeks of a real wild orgy. I mean, these things, they tend to be the wildest toward the end. But that gets back to the question, of Cinderella of the ball. I mean, you're there, you're having a wonderful time, the punch bowl is flowing, the dance partners are getting prettier all the time, and at midnight it's going to turn to pumpkins and mice. And you look around the room and you think just one more dance, one more good-looking guy, one more glass of champagne, and you think you're going to get out of there at midnight. And of course, everybody else thinks they're going to get out of there at midnight too. And in the end, it does turn to pumpkins and mice. And in this game, as I've said, Adam Smith said it many years ago. A fellow named Jerry Goodman wrote under the pseudonym of Adam Smith. Says the problem with that particular dance for Cinderella is that there are no clocks on the wall. And in the markets, if you're talking copper now, if you're talking internet stocks in 1999, if you're talking uranium stocks in the 1950s, there are no clocks on the wall. And the party does get to be more fun, minute after minute, hour after hour, and then it does turn to pumpkins and mice. Number 10.
My name is Luisa Loureiro. I'm a student at the University of Kansas, and I'm originally from Brasilia, Brazil. My question is for both Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. The stock market in South America has been growing quickly in the last few years. What do you think about investment opportunities in South America, given the political environment and underlying risks?
Yeah, our problem in many markets is that we have to put a lot of money to work to move the needle at Berkshire. We've got a market value of $135 billion or something like that. So we are looking to put out hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars at a minimum when we look at marketable securities. And that really narrows the field in terms of countries or in terms of businesses within those countries. But, we made an investment about 3 years ago in PetroChina. Now, PetroChina is one of the 5 largest oil companies in the world. And yet we were only able to, even there, to get $400 and some million into it, which fortunately is worth a couple of billion now. But here is a country the size of China, the largest company in that country, and even there we only got $400 and some million in, although we would have liked to have gotten more. But we weren't afraid to go. We wanted to get paid more for going into China, and we did, because we don't know the game as well there. We would feel the same way in Brazil. I mean, a great beer company down there that a friend of mine ran, and we should have been in that. We knew he was a great manager, and he was going to do a great job with it. So Brazil would not be off limits at all, but we'd have to be able to get a lot of money into a business we understood at an attractive price. We would want it to be cheaper than if it were in the United States. We wouldn't understand the tax laws as well, the nuances of governance, a whole bunch of things. But after allowing for that, at a price, we would do it. We're unlikely to put a lot of money into Brazil's a big country, but we're unlikely to put a lot of money into really small economies because we can't get enough money into them. Charlie?
No more.
Number 11.
My name is Jeff Bingham. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I have a question regarding the manufactured housing industry. What is your outlook on demand for the industry, and correspondingly, in your opinion, will lending increase in a meaningful way over the next few years? And are the homes priced attractively relative to competitive products like stick-built housing and apartments in the face of continued site rent increases at the community level, and in some cases lenders requiring shorter maturities on mortgages?
It's been kind of an interesting history on manufactured housing. If you go back, you have to go back 30 or 40 years, I think almost, to find volume as low as it's been in the last couple of years. And the houses are by far better than they were then. There have been years when 20% of the new housing product in the United States was manufactured housing, 1 out of every 5. Last year, leaving out FEMA demand, we were bumping along for the third year, I believe, just a tiny bit over the 130,000 level, which is like 6 or 7%, probably 7% of new housing starts. So the percentage of the total new housing stock that has been manufactured housing in recent years has really been very low, while the houses are considerably better quality than in the earlier years. You can look at the house. We got 2 houses out there on the exhibition floor, around $45 a square foot. That's good value. There's a lot of resistance through local zoning laws and that sort of thing by the local builders to the influx of manufactured housing. We've made progress on that in some areas. We're actually developing subdivisions in that business. The houses were missold 4 or 5 years ago in huge quantity because you had manufactured housing retailers selling the properties, getting any kind of a down payment, taking the loans, selling to people that we shouldn't be buying them, taking the loans, securitizing them, so somebody in some insurance company someplace or lost significant sums of money. So you had really an abuse of credit in the field, and there's a hangover from that, and it's taken a long time for that hangover to work its way through. I think Clayton Homes, which we own, has done a terrific job in both the financing. They should be financed on shorter terms, incidentally. If you put them on owned land, that's one thing, but financing them for 30 years, in my view, was a mistake. But the terms got very lax for a while, and we're bearing the consequences of that now. But I think the market will get bigger, but I do not think it will get bigger this year. I see a year that, counting some FEMA demand and some hurricane-induced demand, maybe 150,000 units, 145,000 units. And by industry standards, that's down a lot. Now, the number of plants is down a lot, and the number of retailers are down a lot. Clayton's position is very strong, and their record is so much better than anybody in the industry that you have to look very hard to find number 2. Charlie?
Yeah, you asked about stick-built housing and how competitive it was, that's been one of the troubles of the manufactured housing game. Stick-built housing has gotten so efficient, but there the system is aided greatly by Berkshire's subsidiary Mitech. So, and stick-built housing is amazingly efficient when it's done in big quantity with systems like Mitech provides. And if it weren't for that, there'd be a lot more manufactured housing. Personally, I think manufactured housing is going to get a lot better and take a lot more of the market. It may take a considerable period, but that is so logical that I think it will eventually happen.
Yeah, somewhere down the road, you would expect 200,000 plus units for the industry, but I don't think you'll see it in the next year or two. The industry has to think through, and they've made a lot of progress on this, but they have to think through what's the logical way of financing these things, and what's the way to make sure that the person who buys it, really has an asset that's in excess of their of loan value 5 and 10 years down the road. And really very little consideration was given to that 5 years ago. It was just a question of put together the paper, sell it in Wall Street, and let somebody else worry about it later on. Clayton did a way better job than other companies in that respect, but those were the industry conditions that existed then. I think Clayton could easily be the largest home builder in the United States in future years, because that we will be a big part of an industry that, as Charlie says, should be doing more volume.
I also think that some of the sin that was in the manufactured housing finance a few years ago has shifted into the finance of the stick-built houses. There is a lot of ridiculous credit being extended in America in the housing field. And it had a horrible aftermath in the manufactured housing sector, and my guess is there'll be some trouble in the stick-built sector in due course.
Well, dumb lending always has its consequences, and usually on a big scale, because you don't see it for quite a while. So therefore, it's like a disease that doesn't manifest itself for a few weeks, and you can have an epidemic of something like that, and by the time you know you have an epidemic, you're very well into it. Well, that's what happens in dumb financing, and you had that. You periodically get it, but you certainly had it in commercial financing in the 80s, and you had the RTC and the savings and loan crisis and all of that, because literally one dumb project was put up after another. A developer will develop anything he can borrow the money against. It's that simple. And when the lending institutions pour the money out for something, it will get built. And that happened in manufacturing housing. It happened in commercial real estate in the 80s. I think it's happened in conventional housing here in recent years. And if you look at the 10 Qs that are getting filed for the first quarter of some lending institutions and the 10 Ks that were last year, and you look at the balances increasing on loans for interest that's accrued but was not paid, because people had adjustable mortgages, but they were only adjustable so far, but the lending institutions are taking in the income as if it were paid. You'll see some very interesting statistics.
Yes, and some of this dumb lending is being facilitated by contemptible accounting. The accounting profession has not stopped compromising its way into terrible behavior.
Our auditing bill just went up. Number 12.
My name is Elliot Samuels. I'm from New York City. Thanks to high energy prices, other factors, Russia has been one of the best performing markets recently. The country's financial condition has stabilized since the 1990s. A fledgling middle class is taking shape as personal incomes grow. And there are also risks, political, legal, risk to minority investors. But there are also potentially great values among second-tier companies there. I was wondering what needs to happen in Russia for you to invest there, whether for Berkshire or for yourself, and what kind of companies would interest you there?
That sounds like you may own a few Russian stocks yourself. I would, as you know, in 1998, Walter Wriston don't default in 1998. In Russia, at least, he was proven wrong. And Charlie and I inherited a business at Solomon that was in the oil business, big time out in Siberia. And there came a time when we got to dig the holes. We sent the money in, and as long as we were drilling, we were welcome. And then we wanted to start taking the oil out. After our money had been used to drill the holes, they weren't quite as friendly. In fact, it was really kind of extreme what took place with us. So having had a few experiences like that, it might take us quite a while before we wanted to sink a lot of money into Russia. It may be different now, but I don't think it's any certainty. I had breakfast in Sun Valley 3 years ago, this July, I believe it was, with Kordakovsky, and we had a translator there, and he talked to me about whether he was thinking about listing Yukos on the New York Stock Exchange, but he said, it would require registering with the SEC or something, and he wasn't sure whether that would be too dangerous. Well, I don't think he listed there, but he went back to Russia, and he's been in jail now for just about ever since. And Yukos was put into bankruptcy with tax claims, and I just think it's a little hard to develop a lot of confidence that the world has changed permanently there in terms of its attitude toward capital, and particularly toward outside capital. Charlie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the situation reminds me a little of polypetroleum, which years ago was much traded in Los Angeles. And the saying always was, if they ever do find any oil, that old man will steal it. And I'm afraid we have some of that problem in many of the countries in which we're seeking for oil.
Didn't we really have the livelihood of our guys threatened over there, Charlie? I think we sent in some people to get out the equipment, and they said if they sent in the people to get out the equipment, not only would the equipment not get out, but the people wouldn't get out. So we understood the situation. That was not that long ago.
No.
Number one again.
I'm Lori Gould from San Francisco, California. My question is, what are your thoughts about the residential real estate market in the U.S., where it's headed, and how is California different, if so?
Well, Charlie's our California expert. We've managed one time to develop a great piece of property in California, and we spent about 20 years or so developing it, Charlie? Or?
Yes, and we got our money back with interest.
Barely.
Barely.
Okay. Yeah. We finished it at just the wrong time. The land value that we nurtured, it was a terrific piece of land. Charlie lives there. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say we spent 20 years working on developing the land. And the land value, which in effect we cashed out for what, $5 or $6 million, now would have the implicit land value would be what?
Maybe $100 million.
Yeah. But we finished it at the wrong time. So, it's a wonderful, the climate is wonderful. Everything's wonderful about this property. It's just that from time to time, even in great localities, you've seen it happen in New York a couple of times, in the last 30 years, where the swing in properties values has just been huge. And what we see in our residential brokerage business, and we're in I don't know how many different states, is we see a slowdown every place. Now we see it most dramatically in some of what have been the hottest markets. And the markets where you're going to, in my view, you're likely to see the greatest fall off and where you've had the biggest bubble are the ones tend to be the high-end market, and they tend to be ones where people have bought for investment or speculation rather than use. $100,000 for a house and mortgage it for $270,000, and if the value goes to $250,000, if they have a job and everything, they won't move out. I mean, you don't lose a lot of money, even though the market value on a given day is less than the loan value when families stay together and employment is present and all that. But when you have investment type holdings or speculation type holdings, when you in effect have had the day traders, of the internet move into the day trading of condos, then you get a market that can move in a big way. First it sort of stops, and then it kind of reopens. Real estate is different than stocks. If you own 100 shares of General Motors, it's going to trade on Monday, and that's what it's worth, and you can't kid yourself about it. But if you own real estate, there's a great tendency to think about the one that sold down the street a few months ago, and there's a great tendency to think, you only need one buyer who hasn't gotten the word that things have slowed down, and you'll make your sale. I can tell you that in Dade and Broward County, for example, in Florida, where the average condo is about $500,000, if you go back to December of 2004, there were less than 9,000 condos listed for sale, and I think 2,900 of them sold in the month. So you were turnover one every 3 months, less than that. Now the listings are up to 30,000, and the sales are down to under 2,000 a month. Well, 30,000 is $15 billion worth of properties, and you were very likely. You can get real discontinuities in a market like that, where all of a sudden people realize that the whole supply-demand situation has changed. So I think we've had a bubble to some degree, and it's very hard to measure that degree till after it's all over. But I would be surprised if there aren't some significant downward adjustments from the peak, particularly in the higher end properties.
Yeah, and the man is right that the bubbles came in Manhattan and in certain places in California. In Omaha, housing prices are quite reasonable. So the country is not all the same at all.
We just got an estimate of the attendance at 24,000, which was about what it looked like from the tickets we'd gotten. I thank you all for coming on that. Even better, the Furniture Mart, which had sales in 1997 of 5 and a fraction million, 2003 sales of 17 million, sales last year of 27 million, is up so far 2.5 million, with the best yet to come. So I would say we're likely to do over 30 million at the Furniture Mart, and that incidentally is about equal to a normal monthly volume for the stores. So you're doing your part. Thank you. Number 2. But you can do more.
Good morning. My name is John Norwood from Des Moines, Iowa. I have a 2-year rule for my closet. If I don't wear a particular pair of pants or a shirt within 2 years, I give it away to Goodwill so that someone else can put it to better use. With $40 billion in cash, I'm wondering whether Berkshire Hathaway should have a similar closet rule for deployment of surplus shareholder cash.
It won't go to Goodwill, I promise you that.
Thank you. And wouldn't it be better if you had a smaller budget and fewer gifts you and Charlie needed to shop for? Wouldn't you have more time for the beach and a better chance of hitting some home runs?
Yeah, I don't think we'll hit any home runs under any circumstances. But you might consider a normal level of cash at Berkshire as being about $10 billion. Although there could be circumstances where we'd go below that. But because of the catastrophe insurance business we're in and all of that, we do not scrape the bottom of the barrel, but we don't need anything like $40 billion. I think you'll see in the 10Q that we have, I think it was about $37 billion at the end of March. Double check that. And I'm not counting the cash in the finance business. Yeah, 37 something. And we're spending $4 billion on ISCAR. We're spending some money on some other things as well. But we would be happier, much happier, if we had $10 billion of cash and all the balance in things that we liked very much. And we work toward that end at all times. But there is nothing even about the way businesses come to us. We've got one idea at present, low probability, but that would could take as much as $15 billion or close to $15 billion of cash. And whether it comes to fruition or not, who knows? But we do work on them. And what we care more, we don't like having excess cash around. We like even less doing dumb deals because we do them forever. I mean, if we make a dumb deal, it just sits there. We don't resell it 3 months later by having an IPO of it or something of the sort. So you're right. You're right to say that we should be very uncomfortable about the fact that we've got the cash, but it's also important that we not be so uncomfortable that we go out and do something just to be doing something. I would say it's likely, but far from certain, that 3 years from now we have significantly less. But far from certain that 3 years from now we have significantly less cash, and I hope significantly more earning power. But the goal of that cash is to be translated into permanent earning power over time. Like I say, with the $4 billion that we've just committed on ISCAR, we love having that $4 billion employed there instead of sitting around in short-term securities. And that's our job. Charlie and I don't do anything else except appear in movies and that sort of thing. But you're right to keep jabbing us on that because, but we jab ourselves. Neither one of us basically likes cash. We always want to have adequate cash, and we always will have adequate cash. And we are the biggest player in the world in cat insurance. And people come to us because they know we're going to run a place that's very strong financially, but it doesn't have to be as liquid as we are now. We spent $5 billion. Well, we didn't spend that much. At the Berkshire level, we spent about $3.5 billion on Pacific Corp. Now, we contracted for it a year earlier, but we will get more chances, I think, in that field, but you never can tell when they'll come. So come back next year, and I hope we have less cash. Yep. Oh, really? Oh. So, okay, well, we'll go to 13 now. Okay, Charlie, would you like to add anything on that? And then
Well, yeah, I think you may get some perspective on what bothers you. If you go back to the annual report of Berkshire 10 years ago and then compare that report with the last one, despite the great difficulties of deploying cash, we managed to put an awful lot of wonderful stuff into Berkshire in the last 10 years. So we aren't altogether gloomy about that process continuing.
I neglected to go to the adjacent room, which has a number of people in it as well. So I'm going to go to number 13 now, which will come from the ballroom.
This is Phil McCall from Connecticut. I wonder, it's been some time since you commented on Coca-Cola. And now that you're off the board, I wonder if you feel free to comment on it.
Yeah, well, I won't make particularly different comments than from when I was on the board, but Coca-Cola is a fabulous company. Coca-Cola will sell over 21 billion cases of various products, more Coke than anything else, around the world this year, and it goes up every year. It's interesting. The stock in 1997 or 98, whenever it was, sold over $80 a share when the earnings were, I don't remember what, $1.50 a share or something like that. And the earnings then were not as of good quality as the earnings are now when, they were $2.17 or something like that. And every year they account for a little greater share of the liquids consumed by people in the world. They make fabulous returns on invested capital. It's a business that has, exclude the bottling part of it, it has $5 or $6 billion of tangible assets and makes a similar amount. So there are not lots of big businesses in the world that earn 100% pre-tax on tangible assets. And it'll be a great business, and it's been a great business. The stock got to what, in retrospect, clearly was a ridiculous level, but you can't hold the present management, Neville Isidell, responsible for that. And he, if the company sells 4 or 5% more units this year than last year, and the population of the world goes up 2%, it just means that more people are putting that particular source of liquid down their throats than the year before, and that's been going on ever since 1886. So it strikes us as a really wonderful business that sold at a very silly price some years back, and you can definitely fault me for not selling the stock. I always thought it was a wonderful business, but clearly at 50 times earnings, it was a silly price on the stock. So we like it. We'll own it 10 years from now, in my view. Charlie?
No more.
Peanut brittle gets caught occasionally, but it's worth it. It's worth it, definitely.
Push it near me.
What? Oh, you want some, huh? Get your own box next time. Now, do you want us to go to 14 or not? Yes? Yes. Okay, number 14.
My name is John Goss from Key West. Have insurance rates hardened as much as you anticipated? And have you seen a significant flight to quality in the last few years?
Yeah, I think you're probably asking more about reinsurance rates. Actually, in auto insurance, you can figure it out. Our policies are up more than our premium volume. So the average premium in auto insurance, which after all is close to 40% of the whole market for insurance, the average premium in auto insurance is actually down a little bit. But in reinsurance, in which we are a big player, there's great variances. If you take insurance for marine risks in the Gulf Coast, drilling rigs and offshore platforms, that sort of thing, those prices are up very dramatically, but they should be. I think in the last couple of years, there's been like $2.5 billion of premium in the Gulf Coast and $15 billion of losses. So if you paid out $15 billion and took in $2.5 billion, the more astute of you would figure that you needed a little more money for that particular risk. And I think we will be this year. In fact, I'm almost sure we will be this year. Our mix has changed some. Prices are up a lot. But what we don't know is whether exposures are up even more. We don't know whether the experience of the last 2 years, we'll say, with hurricanes in this hemisphere is more to be relied upon than the experience of the last 100 years. You can take the 100-year experience and it tells you one thing, and you can take the last couple of years and it tells you something else. And which is more meaningful? We don't know the answer to that. We do know that it'd be kind of silly to assume that the 100-year experience is the relevant criteria when conditions, we know certain atmospheric conditions have changed, we know water temperatures changed, but we do not know all of the variables that are into the propensity of hurricanes to occur and the degree to how intense they may be if they do occur. We don't know the answer to that. We don't think anybody else knows the answer to it either. So we are getting more money for hurricane insurance. We're getting appreciably more money. If the last 2 years are the relevant years, we're not getting enough. If the last 100 years are the relevant years, we're getting plenty. And we will know more as time unfolds. The really scary possibility is that variables are changing in some way so that the change is continuous, and that what we've seen the last 2 years is not a worst case example at all. And of course you get into chaos type theory with some of these variables where the outcome is not a linear relationship to the input, and you can dream up some pretty scary scenarios on this. I don't know whether they're true, and nobody knows. We are willing to write certain areas, certain coverages, because we believe the prices are adequate and we can sustain the losses. We are willing to lose many billions of dollars in a given catastrophe if we think we've been paid appropriately for it. But it is not like figuring out the odds on flipping coins or rolling dice or something like that. You are dealing with changing variables, and the worst thing you could have would be a 100-year history book in making those judgments. The third quarter, we will have a lot of exposure for wind. We don't have as much exposure now. Well, we may. We don't have as much exposure now. Well, we may. I'd say we're getting there, but we don't have as much, certainly as much as we had a couple of years ago. Prices, questions about prices hardening. The prices are hardening in that particular area. And if they get to where we really feel they're appropriate, we might take on we will take on a fair amount more risk. If they don't get there, even though they're higher than last year, we won't write. We're not interested in writing it because it's a dangerous business, and we don't believe in modelers at all. I read all this stuff about modeling. I wrote about that a few years ago. It's silly. The modelers don't know a thing, in my view, about what's going to happen. And we get paid for making guesses on it. If over a lifetime the guesses are decent, we will know that we were doing the right thing. But if this year goes by and nothing happens, we still don't know whether we were right on the prices, because if you get a 25% rate for something and it doesn't happen in a year, that does not mean that you didn't need 40% or 50%. It just means that if you do it enough times, you will find out whether overall your judgments are any good. It's still a business we like. We bring a lot to the party. Everybody knows we can pay. You got into the question of creditworthiness. If there is some super catastrophe, and I regard sort of the outer limits of that being a $250 billion insured loss. For reference, Katrina presently estimated was about a $60 billion loss. So if something comes along that's 4 times Katrina, which could happen, we can pay, and we can comfortably pay. We would probably have about 4% of that, maybe 10 billion. A very large percent of the industry would be in very, very serious trouble. So we can play bigger than others, and we can survive better than others if something bad comes along. And we will see over a 5 or 10 year period how we do. You can't judge it by any one year. Charlie?
The record of the past, if you average it out, has been quite respectable. And why shouldn't we use our capital strength to get in the volatile stuff that makes other people frightened?
Do we go back to here? One more, number 15.
Hello.
Yep.
I'm Mark Rabinov from Melbourne, Australia. I had a 2-part question on the 2005 annual report. Firstly, NetJets is a substantial part of our operations. Unfortunately, its value is obscured by losses in recent years, and I can't estimate its value from the report. I was hoping you might be able to help me on that. The second value from the report, I was hoping you might be able to help me on that. The second thing, how do I value the Berkshire Hathaway Reinsurance Group in light of the deferred charges on retroactive policies? Thank you.
The second question about we have an item that's about $2 billion on the asset side. I think I'm addressing the question of deferred charges on retroactive policies. That reflects the fact that those retroactive policies where we reinsure in effect the losses somebody has already incurred, although they may not know how much they've incurred. And we have limits on these, but we set up a factor that essentially recognizes the fact that we will have that money for a considerable period of time. We set up an asset, and that gets amortized over the length of time we have that asset. That number, which I think has gotten as high as $3 billion over the years, since we haven't done any big contracts recently, is down around $2 billion. There's nothing magic about that. It means that we're going to amortize that $2 billion over the lifetime of the use of the funds, and we think we'll make money net during that time. But we misguessed on one a couple of years ago and took a $100 million charge, for example, in the first quarter of, I think it was the year before last. The other question was about NetJets, wasn't it, Charlie? But yeah, I didn't get it all. I love the Australian accent of our gecko, but I didn't pick up the exact nuances of what you asked. But my guess is you asked about the earnings and operation of NetJets. And NetJets has grown rapidly, and so far our expenses have grown faster than our revenue. We've got the top service in the world. We've got really the only worldwide service. We have a very strong position, particularly in larger airplanes. But I'd have to tell you that I did not anticipate. I thought we would have economies of scale to some degree, and so far you could almost argue that we've had diseconomies of scale. And our expenses, particularly last year,